Pressure is the defining feature of American life in 2026, and it is building faster than most people realize. At the grocery store, basic necessities now feel like luxury purchases. At the gas pump, the costs keep climbing. Rent, debt, layoffs, medical bills, wages that never catch up with inflation. The economic strain is relentless, and it is reshaping the psychological fabric of the entire country. But the economic pressure is only half the story. The political pressure runs just as deep. The constant message that your neighbors are enemies, that the country is already collapsing, that violence is inevitable, and that democracy itself is hanging by a thread. Every election is framed as the final battle for civilization. Every disagreement becomes existential. And what few people fully appreciate is how deliberately this atmosphere has been constructed and how dangerous the consequences are becoming. This is what life under creeping authoritarianism actually looks like. Not soldiers on every street corner, not a single dramatic moment of rupture. Instead, it is exhaustion, fear, and social fragmentation, a population trapped under relentless economic and emotional strain that eventually begins to crack. And when enough people feel cornered for long enough, violence stops being shocking. It starts becoming routine. Where are you watching from today? If you believe the world is entering a far more dangerous phase of political and global instability, subscribe now because the next major escalation could arrive faster than most people expect. Drop a comment below and let us know what you are seeing in your own community. Then stay with me because the warning signs are everywhere and the situation is escalating rapidly. Earlier this week, 41-year-old Michael Mott bypassed security at Denver International Airport and deliberately walked into the path of a departing Frontier Airlines jet. The collision killed him instantly, ignited an engine fire, and forced the evacuation of more than 200 passengers and crew. The tragedy was horrifying, but what lingered in its aftermath was not simply the act itself. It was the overwhelming sense of public despair surrounding it. America increasingly produces breakdowns that do not happen in private. They happen in front of crowds, cameras, and strangers. The emotional strain in this country has become so severe that personal collapse now spills directly into public life again and again, with a regularity that analysts are increasingly concerned about. And just 1 week before that, 31-year-old Cole Thomas Allen allegedly launched an armed assault outside the White House Correspondents' Dinner in Washington, driven by political paranoia. According to his own written note, he was armed with a shotgun and attempted to breach security before being stopped by Secret Service agents. What is striking is not simply the attempted attack itself, it is how unsurprising it felt. Americans are immersed in violent political rhetoric every single day. Politicians, media personalities, and influencers no longer describe their opponents as wrong, they describe them as evil, traitorous, and dangerous. And under those conditions, unstable individuals begin to see violence not as madness but as action. A society that is constantly told it is on the edge of destruction will eventually produce people who behave like it. The same atmosphere surrounded the Austin nightlife rampage in March, when a gunman opened fire in a crowded entertainment district, killing several people and injuring many others before dying in a confrontation with police. Mass violence in America now feels less like an interruption and more like background noise. Crowded spaces, schools, concerts, restaurants, shopping centers, airports, all exist beneath a low-grade expectation of danger that has quietly settled into the national psyche. And that changes a society in ways that are difficult to reverse. People become more anxious, more suspicious, and more emotionally reactive. Communities lose trust in one another. Public life begins to feel inherently unstable, because it is. Perhaps the bleakest example of all came with what is now being described as the Shreveport domestic massacre. An Army veteran allegedly murdered 8 children during a family breakdown before being killed by police following a pursuit. Domestic violence has always existed, but economic instability intensifies everything it touches. Financial pressure destroys relationships. It magnifies depression, fuels addiction, and deepens isolation. A society under constant strain produces more explosions at every level, public, political, and deeply personal. And right now, Americans are under extraordinary strain. Inflation continues to reshape daily life. Grocery prices remain painfully high. Housing is unaffordable across much of the country. Interest rates punish anyone carrying debt. And millions of people who work full-time still feel one emergency away from complete collapse. This is not separate from the political instability unfolding around them. It is feeding it directly. Authoritarian politics thrive when populations feel exhausted and insecure. Fear makes people easier to manipulate. Leaders promise order while simultaneously encouraging division. Citizens are taught to distrust journalists, institutions, immigrants, activists, and political opponents, anyone outside their own tribe. And the result is a country where social cohesion steadily erodes month by month with no clear bottom in sight. The Carrollton, Koreatown shootings this month reflect just how fragile ordinary interactions have become. A workplace dispute escalated into shootings across multiple locations. The specifics were their own, but the underlying atmosphere felt entirely familiar. Americans increasingly lack the emotional capacity to absorb conflict without escalation, and that is not a coincidence. It is the predictable outcome of years of deliberate political conditioning combined with unaddressed economic despair. The perimeter breach at Trump's Mar-a-Lago earlier this year showed the same pattern from a different angle. A heavily armed 21-year-old drove through security barriers before being shot by federal agents. Notice how quickly these stories disappear. Mass shootings, assassination attempts, violent breakdowns, armed confrontations, they dominate headlines briefly and then the country moves on. Americans have become emotionally numb to violence and instability because instability has become constant, and that numbness itself is one of the most dangerous developments of all. Healthy societies react to violence with collective alarm and genuine reflection. Fractured societies absorb violence as routine, and once that threshold is crossed, future violence becomes easier to normalize. People begin accepting social chaos as the new baseline. That is the deeper danger facing the United States right now. Pressure is building behind the scenes in ways that rarely make the front page. This is not about a sudden collapse. It is about normalized instability, recurring violence, rising paranoia, political hostility, and a population that is increasingly unable to cope with the combined weight of economic and emotional pressure. The rhetoric coming from political leaders only accelerates the problem. Citizens are constantly told they are under attack, that enemies are everywhere, that compromise is betrayal. But a population permanently locked in fear and anger eventually becomes combustible, and history shows this pattern with devastating clarity. When economic insecurity deepens, when trust in institutions collapses, and when political rhetoric turns apocalyptic, violence spreads from the margins into everyday life. Societies fracture not through one dramatic event, but through thousands of smaller breakdowns accumulating over time. That is what America increasingly resembles right now, a pressure cooker with no release valve. People feel trapped economically. They feel isolated socially. They feel manipulated politically, and many no longer believe that institutions exist to protect or represent them. In many ways, they would be right. Under these conditions, some people retreat inward, others lash out. None of this excuses horrific acts of violence, but ignoring the social conditions producing them guarantees more instability ahead. The frightening reality is that many Americans already sense this deterioration intuitively. They see communities becoming angrier, public spaces feeling less safe, and political discourse becoming more openly authoritarian and cruel. They feel the pressure in their own finances, their relationships, and their mental health. And when a society reaches the point where millions of people feel they have no future, no path forward, no institution to trust, no political process that represents their interests, violence stops feeling exceptional. It becomes part of everyday life. And the question the country must now seriously confront is whether its political leadership has any genuine interest in changing that trajectory, or whether the chaos itself has become the strategy.